My goodness, this is incredibly exciting. My name is Andrea Johnson. I am the Executive Director of Green Empowerment, and I'm the Chair of the GlobalPDX Advisory Board. So as a member of the Advisory Board, welcome. And I think we should just all start by giving everybody here a round of applause. We showed up. We put on, some people call them hard pants. I don't know if you've seen that meme, but not sweatpants. And we're here. So that's already amazing. I just want to first give kudos to Jennifer Miller. For those of you who may not know her, she is our initiative coordinator. I will say she believed that this event needed to happen and convinced the rest of us that it should happen. And we are all so glad that you did that, Jennifer, because now we're here together having conversations and discussions. This is supposed to be a free and open space. We recognize that for a lot of us, myself included, this is my first time in a room with this many other people that is not the grocery store, running through it, trying not to interact with anybody else and not have any discussions about masks or anything, right? So this is different for a lot of us. With that in mind, try to be gracious with each other. If somebody asks you to put your mask up, no, it's not personal. We have outdoor space as well, so if you need to take a break, step outside. You know, this is a room full of people that showed up today, probably because you in some way know that you're part of positive global change, whether that's here at home or abroad. And so we are people that want to treat each other with kindness and want the world to be better. So that starts with each other and hopefully trying to make this day feel really positive and safe. So we are following the mask indoor policy unless you're eating, drinking, or public speaking, which is why I'm allowed to have my mask off. So I am following the rules right now. And I guess I'll just start by making it a little personal. I've had a lot of comments. Yes, I did have a child since most of you last saw me. You were like, oh, you had a kid. Yeah, he's almost 2. So that's why it gives you a sense of how long ago it has been. And I know there's some other people in this room who have had a very similar experience. So Green Empowerment is a proud sponsor of the GlobalPDX conference, and I just want to take a moment to thank our other sponsors: Vibrant Village Foundation, Bank of the West, Alliance for Children Everywhere, Health and Harmony, Sensiba San Filippo, and also Nature and Culture International. So this is a member-driven event, and then also the sponsors are really here to help us make sure it's awesome. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my morning panelists up to sit with me. Thank you. So this is an unconference. For those of you who have not been to an unconference, we're going to explain it a little bit later in more detail. But we kind of got together and tried to figure out, like, how do you unconference a keynote, right? Like, we don't want a keynote where one person stands up there and tells us what they know, and then we try to go into this space where it's really interactive. So we tried to find a solution to that, and so we kind of wanted to unconference our keynote. So rather than choosing that one person, we've invited a few leaders from Oregon that are based here in Oregon but working in many ways for global impact to kind of share with you. So I'm going to introduce them first and then some of the questions, and then we'll kind of do our thing. We are trying to leave some room for Q&A at the end too to make it interactive, so feel free to kind of save some questions for then. So first joining us is Anita. She's the Executive Director at MicroMentor.org, which you may be familiar with, but if you're not, it's a spinoff from Mercy Corps and focuses on global small businesses mentoring. I just met Anita virtually last week or 2 weeks ago in preparation for this, and already it's just been a joy, and I know you guys are going to love hearing from her. And then we have Britt joining us. He's the Public Policy Director for, I don't even know which organization you work with.
Ecumenical, EMO.
EMO of Oregon, and he's working on both local and national policy issues regarding refugees and asylum seekers. So it's a really local focus on a global issue that I think is impacting probably a lot of our work and our lives and our maybe thoughts, even just especially as American citizens right now. And then we have Karin joining. She's a state representative, and she's also the administrative director for GlobalPDX. Karin has represented Southeast Portland and Milwaukee's District 41 in the Oregon House since 2016, and she just joined Be Local this year as their first staff person. For those that aren't familiar with Be Local, it is the B Corps kind of member of organizing group, and so it's really cool for them to have a first paid staff person and kind of be leading the charge. Oregon is a leader in the B Corps communities. That's pretty exciting. So we asked everybody on the panel to answer some questions, and I just wanted to share those questions with you because we're not going to ask the question and then answer them, again, unconferencing the keynote. So what do you do in your role that is a different approach to leadership? Trying to make it a little personal. What is a challenge you have as a global change maker? And COVID is not an appropriate response to that challenge, because that's a challenge for everybody, no matter what. What do you hope for the future of leadership? And what do you think our local network could or should do to help get us all to that vision of leadership? So I wanted to share a little bit of reflection on these questions, introduce kind of some of the conversations that I've had with these other leaders in leading up to this. So we felt like these questions were meaningful as we're all thinking about what the new normal looks like. And I think a lot of us in leadership positions, no matter what the emphasis of our work is or our missions, we're thinking about how to use this moment of disruption to reimagine it. And so that's really what drove us to this panel today. So for me, when I think about these questions, I really think about Green Empowerment's local partners. Many of the leaders of the organizations that we work with, they are indigenous, they're from rural communities, and they've been systemically left behind. Our whole mission is grounded in up-leveling them, their work, their voices, and helping them participate in the global development sector, which often has not focused on those leaders. They work in their home countries, they're on the forefront, but are often left out. So while a lot of our time is spent thinking about technology, because we do nerd out on the technology quite a bit, we work on energy and water projects, I personally am not the technology expert, so I spend a lot of time thinking about how to make sure that our entire organization embraces our values. Often in the world of change makers, we try to highlight positives. I am known as an ever optimist. Some people say sometimes I have rose-colored glasses. But I also try to be real about things. So as an example, something that's been bugging me lately that I thought, like, what a platform to share. People often emphasize that extreme poverty has fallen quite a bit. More than 1 billion people during the period from 1990 to 2015 have been risen out of extreme poverty. That's something to celebrate, of course, but that also means that there's 750 million people still living in extreme poverty. And that's only extreme poverty, which is a pretty small definition. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're positioned to thrive. So we also often ignore that the distribution of wealth has also grown during that period. So for me, like many people in this room, we're working directly or indirectly with people that are maybe part of that 750 million, people experiencing houselessness, they're seeking refuge from violence, conflict, or disaster. So what I want to do with all of us is that we're all leaders in our own right, and so I challenge all of us in our roles to confront these hard questions, be open today to dissecting power dynamics, and be bold, creative, and values-driven. So I'll give you an example of how this played out for me recently with my board. We had a board retreat, and my whole board participated in a conversation about how to share power. That's a pretty interesting conversation for a US organization board, mostly US-based, mostly Oregon-based, to talk about when we're working so globally. So we talked about, how do you share resources, visibility, decision-making. And for me, that discussion is what I hope the future of leadership looks like. It's not that we all know the answer, but that we're willing to work together and to have those hard questions. So in many ways, that's what today's conference is about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our other leaders, starting with Anita. Then we'll go Britt to Karin to go really global, all the way to bring it home to local. Thank you. Max. Do you want to come to the podium, or you can either, whichever you feel more comfortable with. We didn't really plan that part.
Good morning, everyone. I wore soft pants, but it feels like I'm wearing hard pants. I actually had to find shoes and all kinds of interesting things, and suddenly realized that, do I need business cards? Where are those? So I don't have them. I couldn't pull all of those things together. Clothes and business cards was a little too much to ask. One of the questions that, and I thought these questions were very thoughtful, and it really reflects, what is a different approach to leadership. I was telling Andrea that it's like for a whole year and a half, the world just sat for a minute. Everybody, whether we liked it or not, had a moment to just sit down and contemplate what all this means, and we became all existential and had to think about our own presence and who we are as human beings and the relations we have with communities and climate and disease and viruses and all of these things. And it certainly was like that for me. I did get a chance to sit down, and there were days when I just looked at nobody but my dog. There was really no other person that I actually interacted with besides, Pablo. So it was, he had a lot of things to say, but it was deeply contemplative, and I run a mentoring program, and I have to say that my mentors really were a significant part of this journey, and they were incredible guides for me to think about who I need to be and who I want to be at this time. Because I remember at the start of the pandemic, I was like, small businesses are struggling, that's what we're here for. I've got to figure out how to do this. We made a commitment to reach 100,000 businesses that were affected by COVID, and I was working 16, 18 hours, even though we set up a Slack channel called Team Compassion, and we were all writing about how people were struggling. I spoke to my mentor, and he said, just take a minute. He said, you're probably your only job right now is to make sure every single person on your team is doing all right, and how are they doing, and what's going on in their lives, and how are they impacted by this. And it wasn't that I wasn't thinking about that, but I also felt the weight of the global issue to be sort of weighing down on my shoulders. But if we, the people that are in the doing, are not going to be able to do the work and be present, none of that was actually going to happen. So it was, there were many moments like that, in addition to, what my mentor said. There were, guides that I reach out to, and people that I speak to, my peers. And the word unprecedented has probably been used more than any other word in the dictionary in the last year. But at the same time, we're faced with chronic issues. We're faced with unprecedented issues and chronic issues. So these dualities of things feeling like this is a year of complete stagnation and so much change all at the same time. That tension, and at MicroMentor we talk about the tension between quantity and quality. Scale is really a big driver for our business, and then how do we maintain quality relationships between each other while we're driving for these really large shifts. So in these times, I think what has helped me to think about leadership has been that we can't just rely on the wisdom of our past experience, because that's really not the only thing we can rely on. We've got to combine the wisdom of our past experience with things we don't even know how to do. And if we don't know how to do it, then this sort of sitting and observing and being thoughtful about our presence as individual people became almost paramount. So inner work, for me, became the most important job as a CEO, was for me to look at how I show up, where do I have resistance to things, how do I react when somebody says something to me or an issue happens. And, with our parent organization as Mercy Corps, there's a large, they're solving, working to solve several other global issues. So they can be tensions that arise, and every day in our lives, and how I show up was going to be a really important part of this leadership journey. So I've tried to develop a leadership style that trusts my instincts, and I can tell you that whether I know that my gender and my upbringing as a woman and as an immigrant has played a role in that, and question myself and doubt every step of the way and wonder whether I'm doing the right thing. I'm not an engineer, I'm running a technology company. Do I know all the decisions? So I've really had to teach myself to trust my instincts, to be able to set ambitious goals and become pedantic about measuring results. And those results can also be about team well-being and my own development, all of the things, everything that we want to change, there's got to be a result that we want to associate with that. And my team sort of now knows that I can be annoyingly so. I'm like, well, what are the results? Where is how are we doing on all of these things? But most importantly is to be deeply rooted in empathy and understanding about other people, the teams that we work with, the communities that we're here to actually support and invest in, And I can tell you that, caught up in the rat race, it takes me a moment, and events like this are a really good moment to reflect. And I've been thinking about this since Andrea mentioned these questions, is sort of coalescing all the thoughts and bringing it all together. And so the other question was, what was the challenge I have as a global change maker? I think this room is a great example. We have, so many of us are here, mission-oriented, looking at social impact issues, and I have peers I can reach out to. But in this space, it's a very isolating experience. It's not just physically because of COVID, but when you're running a venture, it can be very isolating. And so I think consciously sort of getting out of it, working with mentors has been one big piece. Is because in the entrepreneurs on the MicroMentor platform, when you ask them, one of the first things they'll say is that I don't have anybody to speak to about this. Because their families are tired of hearing them talk about their business and what they're trying to do and what the next thing is, and I can appreciate that. And I will say that we are all, we are addressing these large global issues like poverty and climate change and inequities and systemic changes, and we're still stuck with this nonprofit paradox. That we have to be sustainable, make money, figure out how to do this, do it the most efficient way, the cheapest way possible, don't have any. I'm not a proponent of waste, but I think we're still stuck in this nonprofit paradox of give us as little money as possible and please change all these things that are going on in the world that are so big and pressing. And every time I have a conversation with a donor or a funder, I've whether it's a career-limiting move or not, I'm like, quite often I think people are engaging in that dialogue and nobody has time for bullshit. There's really no time to be sitting and talking about platitudes and the old sort of slogans and the way of talking about nonprofit and social impact work. So I think the challenge today feels like just being fearless and putting ourselves out there and speaking the truth. And I think you'll find company in that. I think all of us want to do that, and nobody really wants to be saying the same old. We do want to be challenging the status quo, and I think there's an urgency to this. That's the other thing, is like I feel like what once might have felt like there's time, and we've got to sort of work it out and create a system and a work plan and all of these things, it just doesn't feel like that anymore. I don't know if you're keeping time, Andrea. How are we doing? So what is the hope for future leadership? I think it's what I said. I really hope that we are inspired. We're all inspired to do the right thing. I mean, that's why we've chosen this line of work. Otherwise, we'd be working at Apple or Facebook or someplace like that. But the compassion and understanding that we're all coming with the best intent, and being rooted in mindfulness and contemplation about our own, reactions to things feels like a very big piece. I think leadership today is asking us to really be introspective about how we can show up thoughtfully, with humility, but also really boldly and ask the right questions. And if we have a thought in our minds like I wonder why it's not done this way, it's probably the right question to ask. But we've conditioned ourselves to put all those filters and whatever that might be, if we're female, a woman of color, or a person from a marginalized community, we've just conditioned ourselves to put so many filters and rewarded for being smaller than we need to be and we should be. So I do hope that we all collectively, and I think finally it's like, what could we do in the local sense, is reach out to people and tell your friends that they're doing the right thing, and give them the courage to not be afraid, and be that fuel behind each other's fire, because all of us are here to do important work. And being the mentoring piece, I mean, I'll always be on the mentoring soapbox, but so I think in this local community. I'm so appreciative that I'm actually able to see human beings face to face, and remembering that outside of the four walls and these Zoom boxes, that there are actual people behind this, who are choosing to wear masks and sit here in this room and want to talk about these issues. So, what can we do as a local community? I just hope that we can all support each other. And as cliched as it sounds, collaboration and all of that, it is. It's not so much about are all the organizations coming together and working together. I'm speaking about individual people feeling like they have the support networks to work towards these big issues that are almost never ending. When I spoke to Andrea, I was like, oh my God, I think like this. There's another person who thinks like me. We had so much to discuss and talk about, and it was only like 5 or 10 minutes. So I hope that we can all be each other's sort of fuel to our fire. So that's it for me.
Good morning. Like Anita, this morning was a search for clothes and business cards and those kind of things. There might have been a moment where someone yelled, "Where is the iron?" Like it's not just for second grade art projects. Some of us, have jobs we need to get to. I really also really grateful for Andrea's invitation and for the chance to talk about these really, really thoughtful and important questions. So again, I work at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. We're a statewide association of Christian denominations, congregations, and interfaith partners. We have about 170 formal members across the state and interact with about 500 total places of worship, and representing hundreds of thousands of people of faith across the state. And we run 8 direct service programs. And really from my colleagues is where I have gleaned a lot of leadership insights. I think we know from this last couple years that leadership really matters. How we respond to challenging moments and how we lift up the voices of those most in need really has separated true leaders from others. And I think that when I look at the work of our organization, like I said, we have 8 direct service programs that serve over 300,000 people just this last year, separate from all the programs that our church members operate. So we, just really quickly, because I'll touch on these in a second, we operate, we're one of 5 refugee resettlement programs in Oregon. We operate an immigration legal services program for everything from those who are seeking asylum to want to become citizens, to want to reunite with their families. We place homeless youth who are not just homeless, but are separated from their families. They're alone and homeless. Place them in housing. We offer a HIV services program that connects people, that offers a spot for people to come and congregate and find solidarity, as well as deliver medically appropriate meals to those with HIV and AIDS across the 6-county region. And we operate the largest food bank in the state. And we operate the largest culture-specific DVSA program for the Russian-speaking population in the country. These are just six of the 8 that we do. And from these colleagues, what I've appreciated is learning a few key lessons. One is that we are obligated to share programs and models and lessons that work. Right? In the competitive space, that the nonprofit sector can be competitive, but that's not how EMO has historically gone about its work. When it comes to our host home program, we've helped set up similar programs like that across the state. When it comes to our legal representation program for immigrants in need, we've gone and helped the groups like Kawasar Urco set up their similar programs because we need a larger ecosystem. When it comes to our food pantry, we've had examples where I've been asked to go to Salem and advocate for funding, not for our own program, but for culturally specific, small, new food pantries that kind of popped up during COVID, right? So I think that for me, one we talk about kind of a different approach to leadership. I'm not sure if that's different, but that is, to me, inspiring. It's a privilege to get to work with these folks who approach their work in that way. The second thing is just a constant focus on the needs of the clients. I had a chance to work in our refugee settlement program for 4 years, and then 2 years in our legal services program, where I represented clients in immigration proceedings. And at the end of the day, whether we're advocating in front of USCIS for immigration application, or whether advocating in Salem with elected officials, we know we have to be able to go back and look our clients in the eye, sometimes later that day, sometimes the next day, sometimes the next week, and tell them that we did everything we could to help them and their families, right? And that's there is something that grounds you, and that is very humbling in those moments. We also have to know when to lead and when to follow, right? So sometimes there's nothing so intoxicating as an advocate as to put pen to paper and pass a first in the nation kind of piece of legislation. A couple of those even Representative Power voted for, whether she realized it or not. And that's really thrilling. But sometimes we also have to look and see what is working in other spaces that we simply need to copy because the people of Oregon deserve that here, right? And that's less, there's less kind of asterisks on your resume, but the people of Oregon benefit. And I think we talked about kind of my work. I get to do a lot of work on refugee resettlement work in the legislature and with our congressional delegation. One example of this is that kind of spanned both the First in the Nation and the learning from others was that a couple years ago, Oregon passed a bill called the Welcome Refugee Bill that had the state of Oregon step in with funding for services for refugees at a time when the Trump administration was making drastic cuts to these services. As many in this room know, when President Obama left office, the year he left office, 85,000 refugees were welcomed into this country. Last year, the last year of the Trump administration, 11,800 were welcomed. And with those massive cuts, we saw cuts to programs for those who were already in Oregon. So refugees who were already our neighbors and our friends and sometimes our family members by that time saw cuts in terms of services to connections to housing supports, healthcare supports, DVSA supports. And the state of Oregon said, these are not our values. Our values are not to abandon these folks once they get here, but to stand with them. And the state of Oregon being the third state, not the first state, but the third state to pass something like that. But we had some elements that made it better, and then now other states are copying, right? We're in the same kind of situation here with the Afghan response, where I'm optimistic in the next few weeks you'll see the state of Oregon step in with some investments to support Afghans, make it possible for as many Afghans as possible to come to Oregon who need that support. And in the last couple of days, we've been reached out to by 3 states saying, tell us about your plans. Tell us how we can replicate that in Michigan and Virginia and other places. And that is one of the ways that Oregon can lead is look for solutions and export them to other places. The other thing I would just say is that one of the keys that we try to center in our work is that though it might seem like we are, for example, fighting for more housing dollars for homeless youth, what we're actually trying to do is fighting for the youth who have been abused or neglected or rejected by their parents because they are gay or lesbian to finally be seen as full members of the community. We're really talking about larger cultural change and narrative breakthroughs that we're trying to do in the guise of policy making as advocates. And so the question isn't simply, can we get this program better funding or can we do this differently? It's more, are we, it's not just kind of, are we seizing political moments to bring about societal change? It's are we creating moments to be seized? How can we go about making, for example, the needs of immigrants the issue that our elected leaders must address, a year or two from now, right? How do we make the desperation of houseless students felt right in the hearts or like in the very chest of our elected leaders so they feel compelled to act, right? So it's that larger change that we're always after, the change of narrative, the change of redefining who belongs in our circle of compassion, who belongs in our community, right? I think one of the questions is what's a challenge as a global change maker, which is laughable description, I appreciate it in some ways, but I do think how do we, it's a humbling question, but I think the biggest challenge in our work is, like I said, alluded to a moment ago, how do we convey, as mere advocates, how do we convey the desperation, the anxiety, the dreams of our clients or of our community members who are often ignored in all systems of power? So often we try to bring these community members to meetings with elected officials, but because of work schedules or the nature of last-minute meetings, it's not always possible. So how can any of us advocates bring that, the power of those stories and the impact of these decisions to people in power? Andrea also asked, what do we hope for the future of leadership? I hope it continues to be community focused and the needs of clients and community members, that it can use to center the most vulnerable, which is almost a cliche line, but which I can tell you is constant work. We have a lot of really, really great leaders in Congress and the state legislature, but our job is to continue to bring forward the needs of the most vulnerable as we see them. And also, I just think the future of leadership has to continue to be proactive and systems focused, right? We can't just be reactive. For example, we're reacting in this moment to the needs of Afghan refugees, as we should. But we also need to think about how are we changing our system so that in the next crisis, whether it's those who are from Haiti or those from the fall of Sudan's government or the next crisis, can be entering into better, more protective systems here in Oregon. One example of this is in the asylum seeker space. I was on the phone because of my work representing clients in the past, I was on the phone last night with a client who came to the U.S. with her 2 adolescent sons fleeing violence in Honduras. And she wanted to share with me her frustrations over a state-run legal representation program that we advocated for. And how do we take those insights and those frustrations and the gratitude that it was expressed in the same phone call and turn them into something better moving forward, so that the mom who for sure tonight in Honduras is making that same decision, is going to start a multi-week trek to Oregon over the next few months, is met with something that's even better than what we've offered this woman I spoke to. And then there's a question here that I feel completely unable to, inadequate to answer. What do you think our local network could or should do to help get to that vision of leadership? I'm really hesitant to answer that question, Andrea. I appreciate the opportunity, but I do think that it's continuing of centering of community voices in venues like this and in the work of this organization, this collective. It's also, I think, whether it's for any of our work, I think it's taking on an issue where we don't expect to see progress for years, right? I think the hardest, most necessary work is that work that is going to indeed take time, where it calls on us to be as courageous as the people that we're serving. Sometimes that's lonely work and laughed at work, but I think it's the stuff of fundamental change at the end of the day. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate being here.
I'm laughing because I just got a text about something that is very intrinsic to my comments this morning. Wow, looks like Oregon's probably going to get $4 billion out of the federal aid package for universal pre-K. Boy, are we not ready for that level. So good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Karin Power. I represent House District 41, which is Southeast Portland, Milwaukee, and Oak Grove. And as Andrea mentioned, I've been holding that seat since 2016. We were friends beforehand, which has been fun to see you in person after we both had pandemic kids that nobody saw. It turns out from here up on Zooms, nobody can really tell what's happening down here, so it's been weird for everybody to see us again in person, I'm sure. I am also the new-ish, it's been about 3 months, but that's pandemic time and Zoom time, first ever staff person for our certified benefit company community here, GlobalPDX, and I'll touch on that a little bit more too. It's an exciting way for me to bring the strategic gaps, I think, and how businesses can lead for change to an organization that has been thinking deeply over the last couple of years about how they can become a catalyst and partner without having to sit in a lot of policy meetings and hire lobbyists. So I'm excited about what we might do together. So I think true to probably a lot of you, I wrote this in my car this morning since I dropped my kids off at school and daycare. And framing up how I show up in leadership. That has radically changed over the last 2 years for me, and maybe it has for some of you too. Pre-pandemic, I most often was in the news in helping to lead Oregon's environmental and climate efforts. That's where I may have run into some of you at efforts down in Salem to pass cap and trade program, working on diesel issues, cleaner air issues, and I had chaired the state's joint carbon reduction committee, our energy and the environment committee. I was on our water committee, and that's pretty much exclusively what I did pre-pandemic as a nonprofit environmental lawyer too, at an organization that does habitat restoration here in Oregon. There is one moment where I think I failed to show up as a parent. Because I think as professionals, care work has been completely unseen up and until the pandemic. And I don't know how many of you have kids under the age of 10. It's been really fun to get to meet our families on Zoom, but it's also been seen as an inconvenience by employers we know. The most common pandemic-related, COVID-related lawsuit has not been around people catching COVID at workplaces or at events. It's been around employees who have been let go for, proxy reasons due to work performance that have been largely driven to discrimination against women and care work. So my probable claim to fame as a legislator will be championing and passing a bill that would have made Oregon the second strongest state in the nation on climate policy in 2019. As I was prepping for that, both in technical arguments, because I knew my colleagues were going to grill me on the policy and try to score a lot of political points, I thought really deeply and had a conversation with my wife about bringing our then 3-year-old down with me. And I didn't want him to be a distraction. But I had wanted him to be there with me because that's why I do so much of my climate work. He's going to be the same age I was when I first started politics, and I really want him to know that we showed up for him as much as possible. I ultimately didn't bring him because I thought I was worried about him needing me and not being able to focus on him. And boy, when all of our daycares shut down, and schools shut down in March 2020, did that recalibrate the way that I show up in the world. So I was a couple months pregnant at the start of the pandemic and had my baby, who's now 14 months, Finn, in August 2020. And I started bringing him to all of my committee meetings on Zoom, all of our legislative work, all of my meetings with lobbyists, on purpose, because that false distinction that families and parents were having to manage around care, as if our kids are not part of the reason why we do this work, I think completely fell. And I started to get texts from other female lobbyists who were younger and also had small kids at home or were pregnant, that they were really grateful for me showing up and having Finn puke on me in the middle of committee hearings. There was a moment where we were in the middle of an early childhood committee, because I'll circle back to that, where Finn audibly pooped as I'm holding him, and I had to ask my vice chair to take over the gavel virtually so I could go change his diaper in the middle of a hearing. And that is real life as working professionals. So I pivoted in my leadership capacity at the state because up and until this last year, I was the only parent of 2 kids under the age of 40 in the entire legislature. I was the only one who was paying for 2 kids in daycare and who was taking care of 2 kids at home, or at least 1 kid and being pregnant with a second. So I am no longer on any of the climate environmental committees. Instead, I started pushing for the reinstatement of our early childhood committee to focus on the essential work that people have had to piece together themselves and the structural way that we have not funded early education, like the critical period of development and support for families to get back to work that we should have been. So over the last year, things that are not in the news to the same degree as climate action, we spent about a year studying the pandemic effects on childcare. And as a result, Oregon, this past session, not just under my leadership, but under the leadership of so many other parents who fully showed up in their lobbyist capacities and in their legislative capacities, we've begun to merge 2 different state agencies into one to create a standalone state agency to oversee early learning and care. And we're calling it the Department of Early Learning and Care on purpose, because both of those things are going to be critical to the way that the United States recalibrates investments in our youngest kids. So the challenges in that, I do feel like as a mom and as a parent, this work is still less important than other sexier work out there. And I'm not surprised that this space is still in the infrastructure package because it is so universally felt by families. The prospect of developing universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds in our country will be transformational. If you haven't read, I know we look at everything through an ROI lens, but it is so transformational to get kids into stable places so that their families and caregivers can adequately look for work, but especially so that we're finally paying people what they should be paid to be taking care of our youngest kids. Right now, the system is based on poverty wages, and it's a complete market failure. Every day I get families who email me or call me and say, I can't find childcare for my kid and I can't go back to work, or I've suddenly made a couple extra $100 at my job and I no longer qualify for state benefits. And so I'm getting completely dropped from a program for my kid. I hope by continuing to show up with my 2 kids and not seeing them as a distraction in my legislative and professional work, that we can begin to break down these false silos. That kids are a challenge to be born uniquely by the families and parents who've decided to have them. I think within those challenges too, I'm raising 2 white boys as a queer mom. And so one of the things I hope for the future of leadership is that we stop viewing successful leadership through a white dominant culture paradigm. I think even as I was reflecting on this, the word leadership indicates that you are commanding something or captaining something behind you. So many of our leadership awards at the highest level of professional organizations have begun to be more inclusive, but it's still very concentrated around who has the time and resources to go take unpaid internships, who has the time and resources to get through college and get advanced degrees. What kind of careers pay enough money, and how do people make decisions accordingly if they're caring for other people beyond their nuclear family too? We've set up a system that then prioritizes what we get, which are which is the idea that somebody has been successful in their own right without support from, or the benefits of a system built to serve them. And there are so few women at that top levels that we then don't look at the people who have made being a leader possible. The thing that still frustrates me is the way that men who are parents end up working proportionally about the same as they were before they became parents and get more promotions, whereas women are more likely to be tracked away from promotions as soon as they have kids and they made accommodations. I hope, that we live in a world in the future where I can buy pink shirts for my infant son and people don't look at it a little weird. I got him a shirt at Old Navy that said girls can do anything. And I put it on him for school because I have a lot of great shirts that make his teachers laugh on purpose, some of which are not entirely appropriate for a global conference. My favorite is I Bite Racists. There's some great clothing shops out there that have been starting to make really great infant clothes. But my 5-year-old son asked me what Finn's shirt said, so I told him. And unprompted, as he was getting dressed, he goes, girls can totally be anything. They can be construction workers, they can be president, but Mommy, they're still not paid as much as men. Yeah, that's what happened. My kids are in all of my legislative meetings. We talk a lot about stuff, so Grady is very on top of global inequality. And we take them to Thorns games where they sing, about women's inequality too. I hope in the future of leadership that I don't have to teach my 5-year-old that women are paid intrinsically less than men, that he is not growing up having to look at his peers in his kindergarten classroom knowing that the system is set up against them, especially if they're people of color or women. And I hope that we break down the idea of leadership as if it's one person being successful or one person trying to fix all of the things, because it's both exhausting for the people who are put on that pedestal. It's grueling to try to climb up, a imaginary ladder to reach that whatever level of success that's seen as leadership. So I'll pivot to something that I heard somebody else say. I'm on the Oregon Food Bank board, and our CEO, Susanna Morgan, was approaching leadership, and she said, leaderful. I really want our team to be leaderful, which I think is a much more inclusive and beautiful vision of how we share the work, share the successes, and get away from this notion that somebody has to be in charge of all the things ultimately, and that they're either going to succeed for all of us or fail for all of us in whatever that they're in charge of. So in sort of wrapping up here, I'd also love to get away from the idea that community-driven leadership through like a grassroots is somehow less of a viable model of leadership, and how to grapple with a system that actively dissuades people from both of these types of leadership styles from being on the same level in leadership. And I think conferences like this are really important in that. So thanks for inviting me to be here.
All right, well, as you can probably imagine, these 3 individuals are leaderful. I'm gonna start using that. Susanna's amazing and impressive. And so we kind of wanted to open this up for some Q&A. One of the reasons that we wanted to try to make it feel that way is because we need to get in this vibe of all of us participating, because that's what the next part of this conference is gonna be like. So if anybody has a question from the audience, Adam, I think you might be loud enough that you can just speak without it. Not you, yeah. You definitely, but us, we may be loud enough.
Anita, I really liked your comments about telling funders this is not enough. You need to pony up. And so kudos for that. Really takes a lot of courage to say that. I'm glad for you it's become such a part of directing your attention to them. But have you found them actually making real changes to the way that they fund you based upon approaching them like that in those situations?
I think the model like Mackenzie Scott is doing, sort of giving unrestricted funding and looking at philanthropy in a different way might be slow change. But I will say that, they, to the credit, MasterCard asked for my feedback. That was the point was give us feedback on what we can do differently and how can we be better. And I so appreciated that, that invitation. What has changed is we have decided what levels of funding we won't accept anymore. I think that's also become part of our own sort of stance. We're not going to take money that's not going to pay our staff wages that are actually livable, that we're going to set equitable sort of income salary levels for our team members, and people are not going to be, nobody can actually live on $35,000. Like you actually have, you're having a family and running a household. So to expect nonprofit workers to have that. So we've decided to change some of those things internally within MicroMentor and have that be standards that we're stating to our donors. And sort of a stance we're taking internally. I do think that there's change happening. I can see it. It's not fast enough and it's not nearly big enough, but it's happening.
Anybody else have a question? Don't be shy. You gotta get the creative, interactive, social juices flowing. I'll ask one to one of my peers up here if you want. So Britt, I was interested to hear, I think for some of us, we probably are not aware about the scale and scope of the different entities that are working to welcome refugees and support them here. But do you feel like it sounded like a lot, but is it still really enough? Like that's kind of, I can't get a sense of the scale of the opportunity and the need versus what you see actually supporting those folks on the ground. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit and how Oregon is doing in that regard.
That's a great question. So as of a few weeks ago, there were 3 refugee resettlement organizations in Oregon. So Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, my organization, Lutheran Community Services Northwest, and Catholic Charities. And then just over the last few weeks, we've had URCO join as another resettlement agency, and a group called Salem for Refugees. And in addition, there's a what we call a remote placement site in Eugene that can resettle a small number of refugees, and works a lot with the asylees, those who apply for asylum and secured asylum here. I talked about the cuts that we saw thanks to the previous administration in refugee arrival numbers and related services. What the exciting thing about that's happening now is that under the Biden administration, Oregon's resettlement agencies even have let our basically national partners know that we're ready to quintuple the number of refugees that are coming to Oregon over the last fiscal year. And that was before the Afghan crisis. So really the challenge now has been, how do we, now that we've kind of gone screaming toward our max before the Afghan crisis, how do we make sure that there's enough support and things as prosaic as staffing to housing, to mental health services, to legal supports, to then welcome hundreds more Afghans as well. And I think that's where we've had just tremendous leadership in this space from Senator John, members of the FAM, and others who have come and said, we want Oregon to be welcoming. We want to do our part. What does that look like for your organizations? What it looks like in the educational space? What does it look like in the need for interpreters and kind of across a span of kind of industries and nonprofits? So I think we're trying to, I think I'll say with some strong partnerships, we'll be able to respond to this moment. I think that's going to be a real sense of pride. I think it's going to change what Oregon looks like for decades, right? And that's a really, really exciting thing. Can I ask the next question?
Sure, yeah, you can ask the next question, then we'll go to you.
Well, I was going to ask, Anita, you work with what seems to me to be courageous, resilient entrepreneurs, and what do they teach you about leadership?
That's such a great question. I didn't share much about MicroMentor when I spoke. So we're a global platform where entrepreneurs sign up for mentoring, and this is small business mentoring, and then there are volunteer mentors from all over the world that are the mentors. This past year, we had 65,000 entrepreneurs sign up from over 170 countries, looking for mentoring, and we're the world's largest business mentoring platform. And it is incredible, the kinds of people that are coming to the platform and the work that they're doing. The kind of, and resilience seems like another word that's used so much these days. And when I read the stories that come out of our community, and when we did a roundtable of our entrepreneurs and mentors earlier this year, it's what we're seeing is young people, and any age for that matter, but young people. There was we did a spotlight on entrepreneurs who were like, age was no barrier. There was a 19-year-old from Nepal who found herself having to do all these online classes, and her friends demotivated in like actual education process. And she started her own social enterprise. They didn't know how exactly to do it. Found a mentor. Now they're having learning courses and interactive online sessions. And this is just one example. Back in the day, when I was young, when I would feel angry about something or upset or feel, I did start a nonprofit that helps South Asian women who are victims of domestic violence. But for the most part, I was thinking, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And then here are people that are just rolling up their sleeves and just doing it. And that's incredibly, it's so wonderful to see that. And people are reaching out and asking for help. I think that's another thing that's different, that I think I learned from, I was never afraid to ask for directions. I still do, thank God I have maps now. But otherwise I would always stop and ask for directions. So I found it difficult when people would, my ex-husband and I would go to the store and he'd just refuse to ask for directions. And I do think that that's such an important piece. People, asking for help is not a sign of weakness in any way. So people are stepping up, they're asking for help, and doing brave things. They're doing very brave things. And when I see that 19-year-old Bipatna doing what she's doing in Nepal, in the face of even sort of natural disasters that they're faced with, in addition to the other sort of social issues that we have, people are doing brave things out there, and they're doing it with smart business ideas and developing models that have just never been done before. And really, age is no barrier. And by the same token, we have entrepreneurs who are 60, 65 years old. They're starting new ventures and new businesses and figuring out how to solve things that is very different, in navigating a fully technologically connected world that wasn't quite their reality before. So I would say, in Glennon Doyle's words, we can do hard things.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for what you've shared today. I did have a question in terms of housing. I also work with refugees with Lutheran Community Services Northwest. And one of the things that I have come across most frequently is the housing shortage here. There's a long wait list. It's hard to you can't even get on the wait list at this point. So I guess my question is, how do we as the private sector help fill in the gaps, as well as what do we do to get that cog moving so that that can open up to families who are currently here, as well as those who are going to be relocating here?
I don't know about this issue.
Great question. So maybe some context. Your question is kind of how can the private sector step forward in this moment and in future refugee crises? And one thing that's been interesting over the last few months that I've learned as kind of just a mere generalist and advocate for a series of programs and needs is that the housing crunch has really impacted our ability and all of our organizations' abilities to resettle refugees over the last few years. So it used to be in the past, when I used to work for a resettlement agency, we would have a relationship with a landlord who we could call and say, hey, someone's arriving in 2 days. You got an apartment, right? Good. We know you're a good landlord. You're close to transit. You're close to grocery stores, and we can place this family there. We're now in a moment where, because of the housing crunch, those relationships aren't paying off like they used to. So we have to call a new landlord who says, you're asking me to hand over keys to an apartment to somebody with a 0 credit score, no job, and who has just arrived in this country. And why would I choose your client over someone else? So so in our kind of mix of responding to the Afghan crisis and looking at systemic reforms, we've called for a position at Oregon's housing agency, OHCS, to be a coordinator with us and looking at additional housing supports within our agencies or with other partner groups to go and build those relationships and secure the housing, perhaps even secure the housing proactively so that we can be ready when someone says you got somebody coming in 24 or 48 or 72 hours. We also are working with national partners. You know, one of the great things about this work is that you're not alone in our Oregon island, that there's national partners that are looking at the exact same challenges around housing in this moment and saying, how can we, so for example, some of the housing solutions that we're bringing forward are on a national document that will be released tomorrow on these issues, but we're also gleaning from partners across the country about how they're handling that exact challenge, right? One of the things that I think, what I hope Oregon will do is simply give our refugees, newly arrived refugees, a fighting chance in the market through some basic rent assistance as a first step. Really, we know we need more housing stock, and we know we need to reform kind of this pipeline of available units, but even just a short time, I'll give one quick stat and then turn over. 20 years ago, a single refugee who arrived in Oregon would receive $322 a month for housing and all their expenses outside of food stamps. So $322 a month that single person received. 20 years later, that has risen by $7 a month. And these are federal decisions that we have to address. We are not giving, it feels like we're doing is that, if I can be frank, is what we're doing a good job of welcoming folks, especially under the Biden administration. Some of the folks that we're welcoming are Hong Kong refugees, Burmese Rohingya, those who have suffered as LGBTQIA individuals in their countries. Right? This is wonderful that we're so welcoming as a country, and yet when they get here, they enter into this into a culture and a way of thinking, I think, that we have in this country about that's really detrimental and really unfair. And so I think those are some things that need to change that will ultimately help someone afford housing and stay housed. So.
So I just want to concur with Britt. I think the only near-term solution that we can do is provide direct rent assistance to people coming in so they can cost compete on the private market. Oregon is no different than other states, but after the last recession, the workforce never rematerialized. My colleagues, Rep. Fahey and Senator Jama, lead the housing committees in both chambers. Pre-pandemic, both were looking at how to fix especially local government systems where it can take months to years to get approved for permits due to staffing and IT antiquated systems. That slowed as people went to remote work in local government, and some of the folks in my constituents who've asked me for assistance have been people who had permits that have begun to expire beyond when their construction loans were approved. So there's multiple compounding issues there. now we have a problem where, the workforce has other options. And combined with supply challenges, I just don't think we're going to get back to constructing enough housing in the near term to ever keep pace and catch up, right? Which is an intentional market failure, because as major institutions move to invest in real estate housing as a proxy for growth in earnings, like that system works for institutional investors. It is fine to have a significant mismatch in housing because it means that housing will be a reliable investment for their shareholders. We don't invest nationally the way that we used to in housing as a human right. Unfortunately, that has not been part of the infrastructure package conversation at all. But I think it is the same market failure as we see in childcare from birth to age 5. We have a completely or largely privatized system, or we rely on private contracts, which are never going to provide the stability we need for folks to get the support when they need them from government and be able to move out of the cycles of, I would say, government institutional poverty. So in the meantime, I know through some of your volunteer work that occasionally there are ways to partner with people who have Airbnbs or basement apartments to house people as well. I don't know if that's another option that you could help partner with. I'm sure Airbnb could use some good press and some goodwill, but I do think some of the tech innovation that has happened could also be used to connect with people who have spaces that they may not be using to rent out to a cycle of people in the same way anymore, but have extra space that they're not using.
Yeah. She looked at me because my family posted an asylum-seeking family from Honduras through a volunteer program. It is not a government program, but the program that now is available for Afghan refugees is kind of sanctioned, if you will, through the government, and it's a special Airbnb website that you can sign up for. So it's one way that you could help potentially welcome in the near term. Obviously, it's not a systemic solution, but it is a way that those of us who have that privilege can welcome other families into our homes. And I will say it's very rewarding, especially those of us who work globally, to make that connection in your home, because some of us don't get to travel anymore internationally. All right, with that, we are going to transition over to the more collaborative part of the conference. First, a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you all so much.